The sound of General Vorath's open claw hitting my face echoed through the drill hall like a gunshot, and for exactly 3 seconds, every species in that room thought they were about to witness a murder. They just had the victim wrong. I need to back up about 90 seconds to explain how I ended up bleeding on the inspection floor of the Orion Coalition Joint Military Academy, with 10,000 alien eyes locked on me, and the most decorated Draelk general in living memory, standing close enough for me to smell the iron on his breath. My name is Kale Maddox. I was 22 years old, 6 months into my posting at the Academy, and I was one of 12 human cadets representing Earth in the largest joint military training program in the known galaxy. 12 humans among 4,000 alien officer candidates from over 30 species. We were the newest addition to the coalition, and most of the galaxy still wasn't sure we belonged. General Vorath had made it his personal mission to prove we didn't. The morning inspection was supposed to be routine, 400 cadets standing in formation on the main drill floor, a chamber so vast that the ceiling disappeared into artificial clouds 300 feet above us. Species of every shape and size stood at rigid attention in their dress uniforms, while Vorath stalked between the rows like a predator circling a herd, looking for the weakest one. He always found us. The Draelk are the dominant military species in the coalition, and have been for 3 centuries. They stand about 7 feet tall, covered head to tail in overlapping scales that range from dark green to almost black. Their arms end in 4-clawed hands that can punch through steel plating. Their eyes are yellow, with vertical slits, and when those eyes lock on you, some ancient part of your primate brain screams at you to run. I did not run. Vorath stopped in front of me. I could feel the heat radiating off his body. Draelk run hot, nearly 110 degrees, and standing next to one feels like standing next to an open furnace. His yellow eyes traveled down my uniform with a slowness that was entirely deliberate, entirely theatrical. Every cadet on that floor was watching. He wanted them to watch. He found what he was looking for, a clasp on my collar, the magnetic fastener that held the rank insignia in place. It was 1 millimeter, maybe 2, below the regulation line. On any other cadet from any other species, he would have walked past without a second glance. But I wasn't any other cadet. "Cadet Maddox," he said, and his voice carried across the drill hall like rolling thunder. The Draelk vocal system is built for intimidation, each word resonating at a frequency designed by evolution to freeze prey in place. "Your uniform is out of regulation." "Yes, General," I said. My voice was steady. I kept my eyes locked forward, exactly as protocol dictated. I could feel the other 11 human cadets scattered through the formation, every one of them holding their breath. Vorath leaned closer. His snout was inches from my face. "Is this the standard Earth sends us? Creatures who cannot even dress themselves properly?" "No excuse, General." "No excuse," he repeated, mocking the flatness of my tone. He turned to address the hall, spreading his arms wide. "This is what the Coalition has welcomed into its ranks. Soft-skinned prey animals who cannot manage a collar clasp. Tell me, Cadet, do they teach you anything on that little blue world of yours? Or do your kind simply stumble through existence, hoping nothing notices you?" A few of the Draelk cadets laughed. Most of the other species stayed silent. The Valesi, the insectoid cadets standing in their precise geometric formations, watched with their compound eyes, tracking every micro-expression on every face in the room. They were always watching, always recording. I said nothing. That was the correct response. Earth's Academy briefing had been clear. We were there to learn, to integrate, to earn our place through discipline and competence. We were not there to start fights. Vorath didn't like my silence. "Speak, human," he snarled, stepping closer. "Or has fear stolen your voice? Your species shakes when it is afraid. I can see it in your muscles, the trembling of a cornered animal." I wasn't trembling. What he was seeing was the micro-vibration of a human body under adrenaline suppression, the conscious effort of keeping a system designed for explosive action locked in neutral. But he didn't know that. None of them did. "Permission to speak, General," I said. "Granted. My uniform infraction has been noted and will be corrected, General. I have no further statement. Textbook, word perfect. Exactly what the regulations prescribed. And it was precisely the wrong thing to say, because Vorath didn't want compliance. He wanted submission. He wanted me to break, to stammer, to give him the trembling prey animal performance that would confirm every bias he held about humanity. My calm, measured response denied him that, and denial is the one thing a Draelk ego cannot tolerate. He hit me. It wasn't a punch, it was an open-handed strike with his clawed hand, a sweeping blow across the left side of my face that carried the full contempt of a species that considered itself born to rule. 3 claws raked across my cheek and jaw, me cutting through skin, and I felt the blood begin to run before the pain even registered. The drill hall went silent. Not quiet. Silent. 400 cadets from 30 species stopped breathing at the same moment. I could hear the ambient hum of the station's life support systems, a sound normally buried under the noise of thousands of living beings. In that moment, it was the loudest thing in the universe. Blood ran down my jaw and dripped onto my collar, ruining the uniform Vorath had just criticized. There was a strange humor in that, somewhere far beneath the adrenaline that was now flooding my system in quantities that would have hospitalized most other species. I knew what had just happened. Not the slap, what the slap meant. Every human cadet at the academy had been briefed on the old martial code. It was supposed to be a historical footnote, a relic from the early centuries of the coalition, when disputes between species were settled through formal combat rather than committee votes. Article 17 was specific. A ranking officer who physically strikes a cadet from another species in a formal setting, meaning during inspection, during drill, during any official function, issues a challenge under the code. The struck party has the right to answer. No one had invoked Article 17 in over 200 years. Most species considered it a dead law, words on a screen that no longer carried weight. They were wrong. I turned my head back to face Vorath, slowly. The blood was warm on my skin, running down my neck now, soaking into my collar. I could feel every eye in the hall on me, the weight of 400 stares pressing against my skin like gravity. Vorath was still close enough that I could see the flecks of my own blood on his claws. I looked him in the eye. Draelk considered direct eye contact from a lesser species an act of aggression. I held that contact and let him see what was behind it. Not rage, not fear. Something much worse for him. Certainty. Under Article 17 of the Old Martial Code, I said, and my voice carried across the silent hall with a clarity that surprised even me, I answer your challenge. Name your arena. The eruption was immediate. Cadets broke formation. Officers along the walls stepped forward. The Draelk delegation roared, some in outrage, some in disbelief. The Valesi clicked their mandibles in rapid communication, processing, analyzing, calculating odds. The Gorvathi, a heavy-gravity species built like walking boulders, simply stared with their deep-set eyes, reassessing everything they thought they knew about humans. Vorath froze. I watched it happen in real time, the moment of realization crossing those yellow eyes. He hadn't meant it as a formal challenge. He had done it because he could. Because he was a general, and I was a cadet, and humans were new and small and unprotected. It was cruelty, dressed up as discipline, and he had done it 100 times to 100 different species without consequence. But Article 17 doesn't care about intent. It cares about action. A strike is a strike. A challenge is a challenge. And now, in front of 400 witnesses from 30 species and every recording device in the hall, General Vorath of the Draelk 3rd Combined Fleet had been formally answered. If he withdrew, he was a coward. In Draelk culture, cowardice is worse than death. His career, his legacy, his bloodline's honor, all of it would be ash. He had no way out. I watched him calculate, those reptilian eyes narrowing as he processed the trap he had walked into. His jaw muscles flexed, his tail, thick as my thigh, twitched once against the floor. Then his lips pulled back from rows of serrated teeth, in what the Draelk call a war smile. You dare invoke the old code, human. You invoked it when you struck me, General. I'm simply answering. He straightened to his full 7 feet, towering over me, and turned to the hall. Then I accept. I choose the crucible. A sound ran through the crowd that I can only describe as a collective flinch. The Crucible was the most extreme arena format in Coalition history, an enclosed combat space, with no weapons, no armor, no time limit. The fight continued until one combatant submitted or was rendered unable to continue. It was designed for disputes between equals, between warriors, not between a general with 40 years of combat experience and a 22-year-old cadet. The Draelk cadets were grinning. The other species looked at me with something between pity and horror. Even the Velesi had gone still, their compound eyes reflecting the overhead lights like clusters of tiny, unblinking stars. Somewhere behind me, I heard one of the Gorvathi mutter something in their rumbling language. I didn't need a translator to know it was a prayer for the dead. My fellow human cadets were locked in place. I could feel Dante Voss's stare boring into the back of my skull from 3 rows behind me, could practically hear his teeth grinding. Sophie Hartwell, 2 rows to my left, had gone pale. Liam Cross, the biggest of our group, had his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had turned white. I turned back to Vorath. He was waiting for the fear, waiting for the dawning horror, waiting for the prey animal to realize what it had done. I wiped the blood from my cheek with the back of my hand, looked at the red smear across my skin, and then looked up at the most dangerous Draelk in the room. "Good," I said, and I meant it. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life, and I had once spent 36 hours buried under rubble during a training collapse on Earth, so that is saying something. They confined me to the human barracks, not as punishment but as protocol. Under the old martial code, both parties in a formal challenge were sequestered before the contest. Vorath was in his quarters on the officer's deck. I was in a room barely large enough for 12 bunks, surrounded by 11 humans who were absolutely certain I had lost my mind. Dante Voss was the first one through the door after our formation was dismissed. He was from Glasgow, built like a middleweight boxer, and he had a way of expressing concern that involved a lot of profanity and aggressive pacing. "Tell me you have a plan," he said, stopping in front of my bunk, where I sat cleaning the claw marks on my cheek with a medical kit. "Tell me you didn't just challenge a 7-foot apex predator to a fight to the death because you were annoyed." "It's not a fight to the death," I said. "It's to submission or incapacitation." "Oh, brilliant. That's much better. He'll just break every bone in your body instead of killing you." I feel so much better now. Sophie Hartwell sat on the bunk across from mine, legs pulled up, her expression the controlled calm of someone trying very hard not to panic. "Kale, he's a general. He commanded the Draelk 3rd Fleet during the Margin War. He personally led ground assaults on fortified positions. He's been in more real combat than the 12 of us combined. 1,437 recorded combat engagements," Liam Cross added from the doorway, reading from his datapad. He was our group's information specialist, a quiet kid from Manchester who noticed details the rest of us missed. 41 confirmed personal combat victories, 0 losses. He broke a Gorvathi captain's spine during a dispute 12 years ago. The captain was wearing powered armor at the time. "Helpful, Liam," Dante said. "Really helpful." He asked for data. I'm giving him data. I finished sealing the cuts on my face and set the medical kit aside. The wounds weren't deep, more theatrical than dangerous, but they would scar. I was fine with that. "Sit down," I said to Dante. "All of you. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." They sat. 12 humans in a tiny room on a station surrounded by species that had been exploring space while we were still figuring out agriculture. 12 representatives of a planet that most of the galaxy considered barely civilized. And in about 18 hours, one of us was going to step into an arena with a creature specifically designed by evolution for combat, and the other 11 were going to watch. "Earth's application to the Coalition," I began. "What do you know about it?" "Standard diplomatic process," Sophie said. "We applied, they reviewed, we were accepted on a provisional basis. Basic stuff." That's the public version. The real version is classified above most species clearance. I know because my father served on the committee that prepared our application materials. I paused, making sure I had their full attention. The Coalition didn't admit us because of our diplomacy. They admitted us because of Kepler 442. The room went still. Kepler 442 was a name that most humans knew but few discussed openly. It was an incident from 4 years before our coalition admission, a border skirmish between a Draelk patrol group and a small human exploration vessel that had accidentally crossed into contested space. The official record stated that the situation was resolved diplomatically. The official record was incomplete. A single platoon of human marines held a defensive position against a full Draelk assault company for 19 hours, I said. 32 humans against 300 Draelk. They were outnumbered nearly 10 to 1, outgunned, cut off from support, and fighting on a planet with gravity 20% higher than Earth standard. How many survived? Liam asked quietly. 26. They didn't just survive, they held the position. When coalition observers arrived to negotiate a ceasefire, they found 26 Marines still standing, still combat-ready, behind a perimeter that the Draelk had thrown everything at and failed to breach. The Coalition Review Board requested the combat footage. 2 weeks later, our application was fast-tracked. Dante had stopped pacing. That's not in any briefing I've seen. It wouldn't be. The Draelk insisted on classification as a condition of the ceasefire. They didn't want the galaxy knowing that 300 of their best soldiers couldn't break 32 humans. But the review board saw it. They saw what we are. And what are we? Sophie asked. I looked at her. The most persistent predators this galaxy has ever produced. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most heavily armored, but the species that never, ever stops. Our ancestors chased prey across open plains for days, running animals to death through sheer endurance. Our bodies produce adrenaline in quantities that would cause cardiac arrest in most other coalition species. Our lactic acid tolerance means we can sustain maximum physical output for periods that Draelk physiologists have classified as theoretically impossible. We heal faster than any species our size. We fight through pain that would incapacitate a Gorvathi. And when we're cornered, when there's no way out, and nothing left to lose, something switches on in our brains that turns off every limiter we have. The room was very quiet. We didn't come to this academy because Earth needed diplomats, I said. We came because Earth needed someone who could take the worst these species could throw at us and answer it. Every insult, every slight, every rigged evaluation, every attempt to wash us out. We took it all because the mission required it. But Article 17 changed the equation. Vorath gave us something no amount of patience could have earned. A chance to fight, Dante said slowly. A chance to show them. On their terms, under their laws, in their arena. No politics, no committees, just one human and one Draelk, and the entire galaxy watching. I told them the rest, about my family. 6 generations of combat veterans, going back to wars most people had forgotten. My grandmother, who fought in the Titan uprising, and carried a piece of shrapnel in her hip for 30 years because she refused the surgery, calling it a reminder. My father, who survived the breach at Ganymede when his entire unit was killed and walked 12 miles through vacuum in a damaged suit to reach the emergency beacon. And me, the youngest candidate to ever complete the Black Trail, Earth's most brutal special operations selection program. 96% of candidates washed out. The 4% who didn't were considered among the most dangerous humans alive. I hadn't come to the academy by accident. Earth Command had selected me specifically for this posting because my profile matched a very particular set of criteria: physical capability, psychological resilience, combat aptitude, and the temperament to absorb months of abuse without breaking. They knew something like this would happen eventually, they just didn't know when. You planned this, Sophie said, and there was something in her voice between admiration and fear. I planned for the possibility, I corrected. Vorath chose the timing. I just made sure I was ready when he did. The conversation was interrupted by a chime at our barracks door. Dante opened it to find someone none of us expected, a Valesi cadet, standing in the corridor on 4 of her 6 legs, her compound eyes catching the light in that distinctive way that made them look like clusters of living gemstones. Her mandibles clicked twice, a greeting in their language, and she held out a data chip between 2 of her delicate forelimbs. My name is Thesic, she said. Her voice was the translated hum of a species that communicated primarily through vibration. I am not here as a friend. I am here because General Vorath has humiliated my species on 14 separate occasions during this training cycle, and I want to see him brought down. I took the data chip. What is this? Everything. His complete combat record, unclassified and classified. His fighting style analysis prepared by Valesi Tactical Intelligence. His physical evaluation, including the locations of every nerve cluster, joint weakness, and unarmored vulnerability point on a Draelk body. She paused, her mandibles clicking in a pattern I had learned to recognize as emphasis. He has never lost a personal combat engagement in 40 years. His preferred method is overwhelming aggression in the first 10 seconds. He relies on fear and size to end fights before they begin. And his weaknesses? He has never fought a human. He has never fought anything that didn't react to him with instinctive terror. His experience is vast, but it is built on a single assumption. She tilted her angular head. That he is the most dangerous thing in the room. After Thesic left, I studied the data for hours. Liam sat with me, cross-referencing the Valesi intelligence, with everything we could find in the Academy's open databases. The picture that emerged was both terrifying and encouraging. Vorath was a power fighter. His combat style relied on his natural advantages, the size, the armored scales, the raw, crushing force of those clawed hands. He opened every fight the same way, a charging assault designed to overwhelm the opponent's defenses in the first exchange. Against other large species, this worked flawlessly. The charge carried the psychological weight of a predator's attack, triggering prey responses in his opponents before the first blow even landed. But humans aren't prey. We evolved as endurance predators, and our fear response doesn't freeze us. It activates us. The adrenaline dump that Vorath relied on to paralyze his opponents would do the exact opposite to me. It would make me faster, sharper, and harder to hurt. His weakness was in the transitions. Draelk are built for forward aggression, their center of gravity high and forward, their leg structure optimized for charging and standing ground. They are not built for lateral movement or recovery. If the first assault doesn't end the fight, a Draelk has to reset, reposition, reorient. That window is small, maybe 2 seconds. But for a human running on full adrenaline, 2 seconds is an eternity. Deep into the night cycle, there was another visitor. Admiral Saith, the station commander, a Phylari, who looked like someone had crossed a heron with a deep-sea fish. Tall, elegant, with luminous skin that shifted color with her emotions. She was currently a deep blue, which I had learned meant concern. "Cadet Maddox," she said, standing in our barracks doorway with 2 security escorts behind her. "May I enter?" I stood and saluted. She waved it away and stepped inside, folding her long limbs into a posture that approximated sitting on the edge of Sophie's bunk. Her escorts remained outside. "I am here to offer you an alternative," she said. "Under Coalition diplomatic protocol, you may file a formal grievance instead of pursuing the challenge. General Vorath would face a disciplinary board. You would receive medical attention and a formal apology from the Draelk delegation. There would be no shame in this." "With respect, Admiral, there would be." Her skin shifted from blue to a pale violet. "Explain." "If I file a grievance, every species on this station will see a human who was struck by a Draelk and responded with paperwork. Every cadet here will know that when challenged, humans hide behind regulations instead of standing up. Every evaluation, every training exercise, every interaction we have for the rest of our time at this academy will be colored by that perception. We will be tolerated, but we will never be respected. And you believe fighting a general in the Crucible will earn respect. I believe it's the only thing that will." She studied me for a long moment, her large, dark eyes reflecting the dim light of the barracks. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Cadet Maddox. On Earth, Admiral, those have always been the same thing." She left without another word, but as she passed through the door, her skin shifted to a color I hadn't seen before on a Phylari. A warm amber, almost gold. I asked Liam later what it meant in their emotional spectrum. "Admiration," he said. "Or possibly respect." I went back to studying Vorath's combat data. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. The adrenaline was already building, a slow burn in my bloodstream that would peak at exactly the right moment. My body knew what was coming. It had been designed for this by 100,000 years of evolution. At 0900 the next morning, the Crucible Arena opened. The arena was a circular chamber deep in the station's lower levels, originally designed as a contained environment for combat training exercises. The floor was bare composite, hard enough to ring when you dropped something on it, and the walls rose 30 feet to observation galleries that ringed the entire circumference. Every seat was full. 10,000 beings from across the galaxy packed those galleries, species that had traveled between stars while humans were still learning to write, all of them staring down at a circle of floor 60 feet across, where two beings were about to settle a question that was older than any of them. Does humanity belong? I entered from the east gate, stripped to the waist as the code required, wearing only the regulation training trousers and bare feet. The claw marks on my cheek were still raw, 3 red lines against my skin that every camera in the arena locked onto immediately. I was 6 feet tall, 185 pounds, and next to the beings that surrounded me, I looked exactly like what they thought I was. Small, soft, breakable. From the west gate, General Vorath entered in ceremonial combat stance, his scales oiled to a dark gleam, his claws extended to their full length. He was 7 feet of scaled muscle and killing instinct, and when he stepped onto the arena floor, the vibration of his footfalls traveled through the composite and up through my bare feet. The size difference was obscene. Standing across from him, I could have been a child facing a monster from a nightmare. The Dralk delegation in the upper galleries roared their approval. The sound was deafening, a wall of sound designed to flood the arena with the psychological pressure of predatory dominance. I let the sound wash over me. I let the adrenaline rise. I felt my heart rate climb, felt the blood moving faster, felt the oxygen flooding my muscles, felt every sense sharpen until the world became crystalline. The Arbiter, a massive Gorvathi in ceremonial robes, stepped to the center of the arena and raised one boulder-like fist. The challenge has been issued and answered. Under Article 17 of the Old Martial Code, this contest will proceed under Crucible rules. No weapons, no armor, no time limit. The contest ends when one combatant submits or is rendered unable to continue. He looked at Vorath. Jita, General, are you prepared? Vorath's war smile spread across his snout. I am prepared to teach this creature its place. The Arbiter looked at me. Cadet, are you prepared? I rolled my shoulders. I settled my weight. I let out one long, slow breath and felt the last of my hesitation leave with it. Ready? The Arbiter dropped his fist. Vorath charged. He came in exactly as the Valesi data predicted, a full-speed forward assault, covering the 30 feet between us in less than 2 seconds. His right claw was cocked back for a sweeping strike aimed at my throat, a killing blow that would have decapitated a smaller species and would certainly crush my windpipe if it connected. The ground shook with each of his footfalls. The air pressure changed as his massive body displaced it. Every eye in the arena followed him, because he was the predator, the alpha, the apex, and this was supposed to be the moment when the prey animal froze. I didn't freeze. The adrenaline hit like a switch being thrown. Time didn't slow down, not exactly, but my perception of it changed. The gaps between moments widened, and I could see into those gaps with a clarity that no other species in the Coalition had ever documented. Human combat dilation. The old soldiers on Earth called it the zone. Scientists called it tachypsychia. I called it the only advantage I had. Vorath's claw came for my throat. It was fast, blindingly fast for something his size, and if I had been any other species, I would have died in that instant. But I wasn't any other species. I slipped the strike. It was a boxer's move, a lateral shift of my head and torso that moved my throat out of the path of his claw by less than 3 inches. His talons cut the air so close to my skin that I felt the wind of their passage. The crowd gasped. Vorath's eyes widened. He had expected his claw to meet flesh, and the sudden absence of impact threw his momentum forward, past me, opening his flank. That was the first second. I stepped into the opening, not away, into it. Every instinct he expected me to have should have driven me backward, should have sent me scrambling for distance, buying time, running. Instead, I moved forward, inside his guard, close enough to smell the iron heat of his scales. My right hand came up in a palm strike, compact and precise, aimed at the nerve cluster beneath the hinge of his jaw. The Valesi data had been exact. The spot was no bigger than a coin, tucked in the fold where the jaw met the neck, unprotected by scales because the joint needed to flex. My palm connected with every pound of force I could channel through my shoulder and hips, a strike technique refined by generations of human martial artists, designed to deliver maximum impact through a minimal surface area. Vorath's head snapped sideways. A spray of saliva left his mouth. His eyes went unfocused for a fraction of a second, the neural disruption cascading through his jaw and into his inner ear, disrupting his balance centers. He had never been hit there before. No one had ever gotten close enough. That was the second. I didn't wait for him to recover. I couldn't. A stunned Draelk is still more dangerous than almost anything else alive, and the window I had was measured in heartbeats. I hooked my right foot behind his leading ankle and drove my knee into the nerve cluster along his rib line, another point the Valesi had marked as a critical vulnerability. The angle was precise. The force was enough. Vorath's right arm went partially numb. His leg buckled at the ankle where I'd hooked it. He was top-heavy by design, built for forward momentum, not lateral stability. And with his balance already disrupted by the jaw strike, my leg hook sent him staggering sideways. I was already moving. Behind him, my arms went up and around his neck, not around the throat where his scales were thickest, but higher, around the cranial ridge where the primary blood vessels fed his brain. It was a blood choke, a technique that humans have refined over thousands of years of grappling, from ancient wrestling pits to modern combat training. It doesn't crush the airway, it restricts blood flow to the brain. Unconsciousness follows in seconds, regardless of species, regardless of size. That was the third second. 3 seconds. From the moment Vorath's charge missed to the moment I locked the choke, 3 seconds had elapsed. The entire gallery sat in stunned silence, 10,000 beings processing what they had just witnessed. The fastest takedown in Crucible history. But the fight wasn't over. Vorath was stunned, but he was not beaten. He was a 40-year veteran with more combat experience than most species accumulate in a century, and even with his balance disrupted, his arm weakened, and a human locked onto his back like a climbing predator, he was still the most dangerous thing most of these species had ever seen. He roared. The sound at close range was physically painful, a vibration that shook my teeth and blurred my vision. His left arm, still fully functional, reached back and grabbed at me, claws raking across my upper back. I felt skin tear, but I didn't let go. He thrashed his torso, throwing his weight sideways, trying to slam me against the arena floor. I adjusted my grip, wrapped my legs around his waist, locked my ankles, and squeezed. His tail whipped around and caught me across the ribs. The impact was like being hit with a baseball bat made of muscle and bone. Something cracked. Pain exploded through my left side, bright and sharp and immediate. In the galleries, I heard someone scream, one of the human cadets, Sophie maybe, a sound of pure helpless horror. I held on. That is what humans do. We hold on. When every nerve is screaming to let go, when the pain is so intense that consciousness itself becomes a battleground, when the body is broken, and the odds are impossible, and every rational calculation says it's over, we hold on. It is written into our genetics, carved into our evolution, baked into the fundamental architecture of what we are. The species that chased its prey to exhaustion across endless plains, the species that crossed oceans in wooden boats, the species that climbed out of every catastrophe that a hostile planet could throw at it and kept going. We hold on. Vorath felt my grip tighten instead of loosen. I could feel the moment of confusion in his body, the hitch in his movements when his brain registered something his experience couldn't explain. He had hit me with enough force to crack bone, and instead of releasing, my arms had constricted further. The blood choke deepened. His vision was narrowing. I could tell by the way his movements were becoming less coordinated, more desperate. He dropped to his knees, and I went with him, clinging to his back, my arms locked around his cranial ridge. The impact jarred my cracked ribs, and I nearly blacked out from the pain, but I held on. 10,000 spectators were on their feet. The Draelk delegation had gone silent, their war cries dying in their throats as they watched their greatest general brought to his knees by a creature half his size. The Velesi were clicking rapidly, their compound eyes tracking every detail. The Gorvathi were utterly still, their massive forms locked in what I would later learn was their expression of profound respect. The Phylari had changed colors, their luminous skin cycling through shades that had no translation. Vorath made one last attempt. His left claw reached back, found my side, and drove in. I felt the tips of his talons puncture skin and sink into the muscle of my oblique. The pain was extraordinary, a white-hot lance that cut through the adrenaline like a blade through water. Blood, my blood, began to run down my hip and onto the arena floor. I grunted. One sound, one concession to the agony that was consuming my left side. Then I tightened my grip once more and felt the last of Vorath's strength begin to fade. His movements slowed, his claws opened, the talons sliding out of my flesh as his hand lost the strength to maintain its grip. His breathing became labored, short, harsh rasps, as his brain began to starve for blood. His massive body swayed on his knees. And then General Vorath, the most decorated combat officer in the Draelk 3rd Combined Fleet, a warrior who had never known defeat in 40 years of service, did something that no one in the galaxy believed they would ever witness. He tapped out. His left hand came up, claws retracted, and slapped the arena floor 3 times, the universal signal of submission. His voice, that thunderous instrument of predatory authority, came out broken and desperate. Release. I submit. Release. I held for one more heartbeat, not out of cruelty. Out of necessity, I needed every camera, every recording device, every pair of alien eyes in that arena to capture the image. General Vorath on his knees, a human on his back, the greatest warrior his species had produced in a generation, begging for mercy from a creature that the galaxy had dismissed as a prey animal. Then I let go. Vorath collapsed forward onto his hands, gasping, his scales darkened with exertion. I released my grip, unwound my legs, and stood. My ribs screamed. My side was bleeding. The claw marks on my back stung with every breath. My body was a catalog of damage that would have kept most humans in a medical bay for a week. I stood. I stood because that was the message, not the choke, not the submission, not the 3 seconds that would be replayed on every communication network in the Coalition for years to come. The message was the standing. A human, broken and bleeding, standing on his own 2 feet over a fallen giant. Silence held the arena for what felt like an eternity. Then, from the small section of the gallery where 11 human cadets sat among thousands of aliens, a single voice rose. Dante Voss, because of course it was Dante, began to clap. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Sophie joined him, then Liam, then the rest, all 11 of them, a tiny island of sound in an ocean of stunned silence. The clapping spread, not to the Draelk, not to every species, but enough. The Gorvathi began striking their fists against the gallery railings, their version of applause. A group of Phylari joined in, their skin flashing in synchronized patterns. Even a few Velesi added their mandible clicks to the growing wave. The arena medical team rushed in, Phylari medics with their healing instruments already glowing. They split into 2 groups, one for Vorath, still on his knees gasping, and one for me. The lead medic reached for me, and I shook my head. "I walk out," I said. "Cadet, you have cracked ribs and a penetrating wound to your lateral abdomen. You need immediate treatment." "I walk out," I repeated. "Then you can treat me." She looked at me the way so many aliens had looked at me since I arrived at this station, with that mixture of confusion and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Then she stepped aside. I walked across the arena floor, my bare feet leaving bloody footprints on the composite. 60 feet from the center to the east gate. Each step hurt. Each breath was a knife in my side. But I walked, upright, steady, and I did not stop until I was through the gate and out of sight of the galleries. Then I collapsed. But they didn't see that part, and that was the point. I woke up to the hum of medical equipment, and the blue-white glow of a Filari healing pod. My body felt like it had been dismantled and reassembled by someone who only had a rough idea of how humans were put together. My ribs ached with a deep, grinding pain that pulsed with every heartbeat. The wound in my side had been sealed, but the tissue beneath was still tender and raw. The claw marks on my face throbbed. I had been unconscious for 2 days. The first face I saw was Dante's. He was sitting in a chair beside my pod, his arms crossed, his expression locked somewhere between relief and exasperation, which was essentially his default state. "Welcome back," he said. "You've been out for 47 hours. The Filari medical staff says your healing rate is remarkable." Their exact words were alarmingly fast, which I think was a compliment. I tried to sit up. Pain informed me that this was premature. I settled for propping myself slightly higher in the pod. "What happened?" "What happened is that you became the most famous human in the galaxy overnight." Dante leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "The footage hit the Coalition communication networks within an hour. Every species with a data connection has seen it. I'm told there's a version with dramatic music that's been viewed over 2 billion times." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." He straightened up. "Vorath has been recalled to the Draelk homeworld. Not as punishment for striking you, mind you. They couldn't care less about that. He was recalled because he lost. The Draelk military doesn't tolerate defeat, especially not public defeat at the hands of a species they consider inferior. He's been stripped of his command and reassigned to a logistics post on some frozen moon in the outer territories. For a Draelk combat officer, that's worse than execution." I processed that. Vorath hadn't been a good officer, but the speed of his fall was staggering. In a single afternoon, 40 years of service had been erased by 3 seconds in an arena. "What about us?" I asked. "The human cadets." Dante almost smiled. "That's where things get interesting. Coalition Command has ordered a full review of humanity's classification status. We've been provisional members for 6 months, which basically meant we were guests who could be asked to leave at any time. 3 different species have formally petitioned for our provisional status to be upgraded. The Gorvathi submitted their petition within 6 hours of the fight. The Filari followed a day later. Even a couple of the smaller species who never talk to anyone have added their support." Sophie came in while Dante was talking. She looked tired, but there was something different about how she carried herself, a straightness in her spine that hadn't been there before. "The training evaluation scores have shifted too," she said, pulling up a datapad. "Our combat simulation ratings have been recalculated. Apparently half the Academy instructors were grading us on a curve designed for species with lower physical baselines. Now that they've seen what a human actually looks like in combat, they've adjusted the parameters." "They were sandbagging us?" I said. "They were underestimating us," Sophie corrected. "There's a difference, but the result is the same. Our scores were artificially low because the evaluation systems assumed we couldn't perform at the levels we were actually performing at. When they recalibrated, Liam jumped 14 places in the tactical assessment rankings. I moved up 9 in the combat engineering track. Dante is now ranked 3rd in the entire close quarters combat division." "3rd out of 4,000? I looked at Dante. He shrugged, but I could see the pride burning behind his carefully maintained composure. "Turns out when they stop grading you as a prey animal, the numbers look different." The visitors came steadily after that. Liam arrived with a complete data analysis of the fight, broken down into frame-by-frame segments that he had annotated with biomechanical notes. He told me that 6 different species intelligence services had filed formal requests to study human combat physiology, and that the Academy's research division had already commissioned 3 separate papers on human adrenaline response. Then Thessic came. The Valesi cadet moved through the medical bay on her 6 legs with the precise, deliberate gait of her species, her compound eyes sweeping the room in a pattern that I now recognized as a security check. She stopped beside my pod and clicked her mandibles twice. "Your technique was efficient," she said. "The jaw strike was delivered within 4% of optimal force. The blood choke was textbook. However, your decision to absorb the tail strike rather than releasing and repositioning was statistically suboptimal. A release and retack sequence would have reduced your injury probability by 62%. Would it have ended the fight faster?" She paused. "No. Maintaining the choke was the faster resolution. But you accepted significant personal damage to achieve it. That's what humans do, I said. Yes, she said. I am beginning to understand that. She stood silently for a moment, her mandibles working in a pattern I couldn't read. 3 species who were previously hostile to human inclusion in the coalition have reversed their positions since the fight. The Villesi intelligence assessment of humanity has been revised upward by 2 full classification grades. You are no longer categorized as a developing species. What are we categorized as? Concerning, she said, and left. Admiral Sasith visited later that evening. Her skin was the pale blue of formal neutrality, but I noticed traces of that warm amber I had seen before, flickering at the edges of her luminous patterns. Cadet Maddox, she said, settling her tall frame into the chair Dante had vacated. The Coalition Council has been in emergency session since the fight. I have been asked to inform you that General Vorath's conduct has been formally condemned by 9 of the 12 Council species, including 3 Draelk-allied factions. This is unprecedented. I appreciate that, Admiral. I'm not finished. She leaned forward slightly. You have done something remarkable, Cadet, but you have also done something dangerous. You are now a symbol, and symbols attract attention of 2 kinds. The first is admiration. You have earned a great deal of that. The second is enmity. The Draelk will not forget what happened in that arena. I didn't expect them to. You should understand the scope of what I mean. Vorath was not universally loved among his own kind. His defeat will be used by some factions as a rallying cry, proof that the Draelk are weakening, that outsider species are being allowed to humiliate them. Other factions will use it differently, as evidence that humans are a threat that must be contained before we grow stronger. Either way, you have put a target on humanity's back. I met her luminous eyes. Humanity has always had a target on its back, Admiral. On Earth, every predator, every disease, every natural disaster tried to end us. We're still here, not because we avoided threats, but because we faced them. She studied me for a long time. You are a stubborn species. The stubbornest. Her skin flickered fully amber for just a moment before settling back to diplomatic blue. She left without saying goodbye, which I was learning was a Phylari sign of trust. Goodbyes were for strangers. The last visitor of the day was one I didn't expect. A young Draelk officer, barely out of his cadet years himself, arrived at the medical bay entrance, and hesitated there for nearly a minute before stepping inside. He was smaller than Vorath, probably a junior grade, and his scales were a lighter green that marked him as being from one of the southern continent bloodlines. His eyes darted around the room before settling on me. Cadet Maddox, he said. His voice lacked the deep resonance of a senior Draelk. My name is Lieutenant Drevak. I am not here in any official capacity. Then why are you here? He moved closer, lowering his voice. Because you need to know something that the official channels will not tell you. Vorath did not strike you on impulse. It was planned. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Explain. There is a faction within the Draelk military command. Older officers, traditionalists, who have opposed human admission to the coalition since the beginning. They view your species as a contamination, an inferior race being elevated above its station. Vorath was their instrument. He was ordered to provoke a human cadet into responding with aggression so that the incident could be used as evidence that humans are undisciplined and dangerous. The expected outcome was a formal reprimand and a recommendation for humanity's expulsion from the academy. He was supposed to provoke me into hitting him, I said slowly. Not the other way around. Correct, your invocation of Article 17 was not part of their plan. They expected you to either cower or lash out. Either response would have served their purposes. Instead, you turned their own laws against them. They were unprepared. And now? Drevak's scales shifted color slightly, a nervous response. Now they are angry and scared. Vorath's defeat has made their position worse, not better. They needed humans to look weak. Instead, you made the Draelk look weak. The faction's influence depends on the perception of Draelk's superiority. You have damaged that perception in a way that cannot be undone through political channels. So what will they do? I don't know yet, but I know they are not finished. They will find another way to challenge humanity, and next time, They will not send an aging general with more pride than sense. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. I tell you this, because not all Draelk share their views. Some of us saw what you did in that arena, and felt something we have not felt in a long time. What was that? Respect, he said, and walked out. I lay in the medical pod after he left, staring at the ceiling, processing everything. The victory, the fallout, the warnings. The claw marks on my face throbbed with a slow, persistent ache that I was beginning to think would never fully go away. I reached for my communication pad and opened a channel to Earth. It took nearly 4 minutes for the signal to cross the distance between the station and home, and another 4 for the response to arrive. But I needed to make this call. My father's face appeared on the screen. He was in his study, the one with the old photographs on the wall, generations of Maddox faces in uniform. He looked at me, and I saw his eyes track to the wounds, the healing claw marks, the medical equipment surrounding me. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. The footage had reached Earth. We sat in silence for a moment, the silence of two people who understood each other well enough that most words were unnecessary. Then he nodded once, a small, deliberate motion. You held on, he said. Not a question, recognition. Acknowledgement from someone who had been where I was, who had bled and held on and stood up when the universe demanded he stay down. I almost broke then, the composure that had carried me through the challenge, through the fight, through the aftermath, nearly cracked under the weight of those 3 words. My throat tightened, my vision blurred. I pressed my hand against my healing ribs and breathed through it. Yeah, I said. I held on. He nodded again, and in that nod was everything. Pride, understanding, the bone-deep recognition of a truth that our family had carried for 6 generations. Maddox's blood doesn't stay down. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. He told me my mother was growing tomatoes again. I told him the station food was terrible. Normal things, human things. And in that normalcy, I found something I hadn't realized I needed. Ground beneath my feet. After we disconnected, I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. I was halfway there when my personal terminal chimed with an incoming message. Encrypted. No sender identification. I opened it. It was not a threat. It was worse. It was a formal declaration, written in the archaic syntax of the old martial code, bearing the seal of the Draelk War Council. A challenge of lineage, the most extreme mechanism in the code, one that hadn't been invoked in over 400 years. Under a challenge of lineage, a species could challenge another species' right to exist within the coalition through single combat. The losing species was expelled permanently. No appeal, no review, no second chance. And the champion they had selected was not a general, not a politician, not a bureaucrat playing at soldier. They had selected a warblade, a Draelk warblade, the closest thing their species had to a living weapon, an individual bred, engineered, and trained from birth for a single purpose. Killing. I read the name, Korath the Unbroken. 37 personal combat victories, 0 defeats, 0 submissions. Every opponent he had ever faced in a formal challenge had been carried out of the arena. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I closed the terminal, lay back in my medical pod, and looked at the ceiling. They weren't coming for me anymore. They were coming for all of us. The next 72 hours moved at the speed of a catastrophe. The challenge of lineage was validated by the Coalition's legal counsel within a day. The Draelk War Council had filed it through proper channels, dotting every archaic procedural requirement with a precision that suggested they had been preparing this long before Vorath ever stepped onto that drill floor. Everything about the challenge was legally airtight, which meant that everything about it was also devastating. The rules were specific and merciless. Under a challenge of lineage, the defending species must put forward a champion who is a current member of the institution where the original dispute occurred. In this case, the Academy. That meant the champion had to be one of the 12 human cadets on the station. Earth Command couldn't send a special forces team. They couldn't fly in a professional fighter. They couldn't even send a replacement. The champion had to be someone who was already here. It had to be one of us. I was still in the medical bay when Dante brought the news to me in person. He came in looking like a man who had been running on fury and coffee for 3 days straight, which was exactly what he had been doing. "We've been going through every angle," he said, dropping into the chair beside my pod. "Liam has read the entire Old Martial Code twice. Sophie has been in contact with Earth Command's legal division. There's no loophole, no alternative, no way out that doesn't involve one of us stepping into an arena with a warblade. Then one of us steps into the arena. Kale, you're not healed. Your ribs are still knitting. The wound in your side is barely closed. The medical staff says you need at least 2 more weeks before you're cleared for any physical activity, let alone combat. When is the challenge scheduled?" 5 days. I closed my eyes. 5 days. My ribs were cracked, my oblique muscle was torn, and the most dangerous close combat specialist the Draelk had ever produced was going to be standing across from me in less than a week. "I'll be ready," I said. "You won't. That's the point. That's why they filed now instead of waiting. They know you're injured. They know no one else in our group has your combat background. This isn't a fair fight. This is an execution dressed up in legal language." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "Dante, who else is going to do it?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew the truth. Dante was a good fighter, tough and skilled, but he was a boxer, not a specialist. Sophie was brilliant in combat engineering, but her physical combat scores were middle of the pack. Liam was an analyst, not a warrior. The other cadets were capable, dedicated, and brave, but none of them had the training or the experience to survive 5 minutes against a warblade. I was the only option. Injured, exhausted, still bleeding from the last fight. I was the only human on this station who had a chance. And even that chance was slim enough to see through. "I need the Velesi data on Korath," I said. "Everything they have." Thesic already anticipated that. "She's been compiling a dossier since the challenge was filed." Dante paused. "Kale." She looked worried. I've never seen a Velesi look worried before. "Good. Worried means she's taking it seriously." The dossier arrived within the hour. I read it in my medical pod, and with each page, the cold weight in my chest grew heavier. Korath the Unbroken was not Vorath. Vorath had been a political general, a career officer, whose combat skills were real, but secondary to his strategic role. Korath was something else entirely. He was the product of a Draelk breeding program that selected for physical superiority across 20 generations. He had been trained from the age of 3 in every combat discipline the Draelk had developed. He stood 7.5 feet tall, broader and faster than Vorath, with a recorded reaction time that approached the theoretical maximum for his species. His combat record was flawless. 37 formal challenges, 37 victories. His opponents included the best fighters from 8 different species, including a Gorvathi champion, who outweighed him by 300 pounds. Every single one of them had been removed from the arena on a stretcher. Korath didn't toy with his opponents. He didn't make speeches or play to the crowd. He walked in, he fought, and he ended it. But his file also revealed something that Vorath's hadn't, a pattern. Korath was a perfect fighter. His technique was flawless, his conditioning was beyond reproach, and his tactical decision-making in combat was machine-precise. Every fight followed an optimal pattern, the perfect strike at the perfect moment, exploiting his opponent's weaknesses with surgical accuracy. He didn't make mistakes. And that, I realized, was his weakness. He didn't improvise. Every fight in his record followed a recognizable structure. He analyzed his opponent's capabilities in the first exchange, identified the optimal attack pattern, and executed it with ruthless efficiency. Against fighters who operated within predictable parameters, this was unbeatable. His opponents fought the way their species fought, using techniques and strategies that had been developed over centuries and codified into training programs. Korath had studied them all. He knew what every species would do before they did it. But he had never fought a human. And humans, more than any other species in the galaxy, are defined by one trait that no Draelk breeding program could anticipate. We adapt. In real time, in the middle of a fight, between one heartbeat and the next, we change. We learn. We take what isn't working and we discard it. We see what our opponent doesn't expect and we become that thing. It is the same evolutionary gift that let our ancestors spread across every environment on Earth, from deserts to tundra to open ocean. We are the species that reinvents itself when everything else fails. I shared my analysis with the team. Dante listened with his arms crossed. Sophie ran the numbers on her datapad. Liam cross-referenced my observations with the combat records. "You're not wrong," Liam said slowly. "His decision trees are consistent across all 37 fights. He's never had to deviate from his optimal pattern because no one has ever survived long enough to force him to." "So the strategy is to survive long enough to force him to deviate?" Dante asked. "The strategy is to give him a problem he's never seen before. A target that doesn't behave the way his models predict. Every species he's fought has relied on their natural strengths. The Gorvathi used power, the Velesi used speed, the Phileri used flexibility. They fought the way they were designed to fight. I need to fight the way humans actually fight." "Which is how?" Sophie asked. "Like we're making it up as we go." The days that followed were the most painful and productive of my life. I pushed my recovery as hard as the Phileri medical staff would allow, and then, a little harder than they would have liked. My ribs were healing, faster than they expected, because human bones knit like they have somewhere to be, but the muscle damage in my side was still significant. I couldn't throw a full-power strike from my left without a spike of pain that blurred my vision. I trained around the injury. I drilled movement patterns that relied on footwork and angles, rather than raw striking power. I studied Korath's footage until I could predict his movements with my eyes closed. And I prepared myself mentally for the reality that this fight was going to hurt more than anything I had ever experienced. What I didn't expect was the help. It started with Thesic. The Velesi intelligence officer brought me a second dossier, this one containing information that was clearly above her clearance level. Detailed anatomical scans of Korath's specific body structure, his personal training routines, even footage from his private preparation sessions that could only have been obtained through intelligence channels. "This goes beyond academic interest," I told her. "My species has been marginalized by the Draelk for 2 centuries, she replied, her mandibles clicking in the pattern I had learned meant intensity. "If humanity falls, the balance of power in the coalition shifts further in their favor. This is not altruism, this is strategy." Then the Gorvathi reached out. A senior cadet named Torin, a being built like a walking wall of stone, approached me in the recovery ward and handed me a small package without a word. Inside were hand wraps, custom modified with a micro-texture weave that would improve grip on scaled skin. The modifications were legal under Crucible rules, barely, and they solved a problem I hadn't figured out how to address: how to maintain a chokehold on a surface designed by evolution to be impossible to grab. The Phileri contribution came from the medical staff. A senior medic named Lyris handed me a treatment protocol, a carefully calibrated stimulant regimen that would maximize my natural adrenaline response during the fight, without crossing the line into prohibited enhancement. It was the kind of fine-line medical intervention that required intimate knowledge of human physiology, knowledge the Phileri had been quietly accumulating since our arrival at the Academy. "We have been studying your species since you arrived," Lyris told me, her luminous skin a soft, warm amber. "Your bodies are remarkable. The chemical systems that govern your stress response, the way your hormones cascade during physical crisis, the speed at which your neural pathways redirect resources during combat. We have documented over 40 physiological phenomena that have no parallel in any other coalition species." "Is that why you're helping me?" "We are helping you because the coalition was founded on the principle that every species has something to contribute. The Draelk have spent 300 years trying to replace that principle with hierarchy. If they succeed in expelling humanity, they will come for others next." She paused, her skin flickering. "Also, I confess to scientific curiosity. I want to see what a fully activated human is capable of." On the morning of the 5th day, I stood in the preparation room beneath the arena and wrapped my hands with Torin's modified wraps. My ribs ached. My side was tight with healing tissue. My left arm's range of motion was reduced by about 15%. None of it mattered. I was going to walk into that arena, because 12 human cadets and the future of our species were depending on me. I was going to face the most dangerous individual combatant the Draelk had ever produced. And I was going to do what humans have always done when faced with something bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than ourselves. I was going to adapt. The arena was different this time. The same circular chamber, the same composite floor, but the energy in the galleries above had changed. The last fight had been a spectacle, a curiosity, a cadet challenging a general in a fit of bravado. This was something else entirely. This was existential. If I lost, humanity was expelled from the coalition, permanently. Every human cadet, every diplomatic initiative, every trade agreement, every scientific collaboration, all of it, gone, erased as if we had never been. The galleries were full again, but the composition had shifted. There were more senior officials, more military observers, more species representatives who normally wouldn't attend an academy event. The Gorvathi delegation sat in their reinforced section like a wall of living stone, their deep-set eyes fixed on the arena floor. The Velesi occupied their usual geometric formations, compound eyes catching the light. The Phileri glowed in shifting patterns that I couldn't read. And the Draelk section was different, larger, more aggressive. The officers in the front rows wore ceremonial armor, and their yellow eyes burned with something that went beyond competitive interest. This was their play, their endgame. Expel the humans, reassert dominance, close the door forever. Korath entered from the west gate, and I understood immediately why Thesic had looked worried. He was bigger than Vorath, not just taller but wider, his frame packed with a density of muscle that made him look like something carved from dark stone. His scales were almost black, a coloration that in Draelk culture denoted the highest tier of breeding. His movements were fluid and precise, nothing wasted, nothing theatrical, each step placed with the economy of a being who had turned his body into the most efficient weapon in the galaxy. His eyes found me across the arena and held. There was no contempt in them, no sneer, no posturing, just calm, professional assessment. He was measuring me the way a surgeon measures the operating field, identifying every variable, cataloging every weakness, building his attack model in real time. That was the first time I felt genuine fear since this whole thing began. Not because he was big, not because he was dangerous, because he was smart. Vorath had been arrogant. Korath was clinical. The Arbiter took his position, the same Gorvathi who had officiated the first fight, though his ceremonial robes were different this time, black instead of white, signifying the gravity of the challenge. The challenge of lineage has been issued by the Draelk War Council and answered by the human delegation, he announced, his voice filling the arena like distant thunder. Under the oldest laws of the Coalition, this contest will determine humanity's continued membership. The rules of the Crucible apply. No weapons, no armor, no time limit. The contest ends when one combatant submits or is rendered unable to continue. He looked at Korath. Champion of the Draelk, are you prepared? Korath inclined his head. A single, precise motion. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The Arbiter looked at me. Champion of humanity, are you prepared? I settled my weight. I breathed in, feeling my cracked ribs protest, feeling the tight pull of healing tissue in my side, feeling the steady pound of my heart pushing blood through a body that was damaged and imperfect, and absolutely, unequivocally ready. Ready? The signal sounded. Korath did not charge. That was the first difference, and it nearly undid me. My preparation had been built around the assumption that he would open like Vorath, with an aggressive forward assault designed to overwhelm. Instead, he advanced at a measured pace, his clawed hands low, his weight balanced, his yellow eyes tracking my every micro-movement with the patient focus of a predator that knows it doesn't need to rush. He was reading me, building his model, identifying how I moved, how I balanced, where my injuries restricted my motion. He circled to my left, toward my damaged side, and I adjusted, keeping my right shoulder forward, protecting the weakness. His first strike came without warning. No wind-up, no telegraph, just a lateral claw sweep that materialized from his relaxed posture like a snake uncoiling. It was faster than anything Vorath had thrown, and I barely slipped it, the tips of his claws passing close enough to cut air against my cheek. I countered immediately, driving a straight right toward the jaw nerve cluster that had worked against Vorath. Korath swatted it aside like brushing away a fly. His response was a short, chopping elbow that caught my forearm and sent numbness racing from my wrist to my shoulder. He was faster, he was smarter, and he had clearly studied the footage of my fight with Vorath. The next 30 seconds were the most technical exchange of my life. He probed my defenses with combinations that were designed to force me into predictable responses, testing whether I would react the same way I had against his predecessor. I didn't. I changed my angles. I varied my timing. I threw strikes from positions that no training manual had ever documented. Techniques I had learned in underground gyms on Earth where the only rule was that there were no rules. He adapted. Not as fast as I did. Not with the same fluid improvisation, but faster than I had hoped. Each time I found a new angle, he cataloged it and adjusted his defense. Each time I tried a technique he hadn't seen, he integrated it into his model and prepared a counter. We were both learning in real time, both adapting. But Korath had 37 fights of experience to draw from, and I had one. The first real blow came at the 45-second mark. Korath feinted high and struck low, his tail sweeping my lead leg. I went down, hit the floor hard on my damaged side, and the pain was so intense that my vision tunneled to a single bright point. He was on me instantly, a dropping elbow aimed at my spine that would have ended the fight and possibly my ability to walk. I rolled. His elbow hit composite instead of flesh, cracking the floor surface. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline flooding my system in a wave so powerful that the pain in my side simply ceased to matter. This was the human edge, the thing no other species could replicate. In moments of true crisis, our bodies don't just respond to injury, they override it. I came up swinging, not with technique, not with the precise, targeted strikes I had used against Vorath, but with something older and more fundamental. The raw, adaptive violence of a species that had spent its evolutionary history fighting things bigger and more dangerous than itself, with nothing but creativity and refusal. My fist connected with Korath's ribline, not the nerve cluster, he had armored that after watching my fight, but the gap between two scale plates where the intercostal muscles were exposed. He grunted, his first sound, his first acknowledgement that I could hurt him. I pressed, a hook to his lowered guard, an uppercut that skidded off his jaw scales but forced his head back, a knee strike aimed at his inner thigh where the scales thinned. He blocked most of it, but not all. Each blow that landed told me something, about his reaction patterns, about his pain tolerance, about the tiny delays in his response when he encountered something his model hadn't predicted. He hit me back, a backhand that caught my temple and sent stars cascading across my vision. A knee to my chest that compressed my damaged ribs and sent a bolt of agony through my entire torso. A claw rake across my back that opened 3 parallel lines from my left shoulder to my right hip. I took it all. I took it because humans are the galaxy's endurance predators, because our ancestors chased gazelles across savannas until the animals' hearts gave out, because our pain tolerance is the highest of any known species relative to our body mass, because when something inside a human breaks, we don't stop. We find a way around the broken part. The fight stretched past a minute, past 2. In the galleries, beings who had expected a quick execution were watching something they had never seen before. A human absorbing punishment that should have ended the fight 10 times over, and coming back each time with something new. At the 3-minute mark, I found it. The gap. Korath overcommitted on a right cross, putting his full weight behind a strike aimed at my head. It was an optimal move, textbook perfect, exactly the right technique for the situation his model had calculated. And it was wrong. Because I wasn't where his model predicted I would be. I had been setting this up for 90 seconds, feeding him false patterns, letting him build a prediction of my movement that was accurate enough to be trusted, but slightly, critically, off. I had moved left in response to his right cross 6 times. He expected me to move left a 7th time. I moved right. Into the strike, under it. His fist passed over my head, and his weight carried him forward, past his center of gravity, into the dead space where his balance was committed and his defenses were open. I hit him with everything I had left, a right hook to the exposed nerve cluster beneath his jaw, the same one I had used on Vorath but delivered from a different angle, with a rotating hip drive that doubled the impact force. His head snapped, his eyes went glassy, and before he could recover, I was behind him, my arms wrapping around his cranial ridge, my legs locking around his torso, the modified hand wraps gripping his scales with a friction that nature had never intended. The blood choke locked in. Korath was stronger than Vorath. His reaction was immediate and violent. He reached back, grabbed my arm and squeezed. I felt the bones in my forearm compress to the edge of fracture. His other hand clawed at my locked wrists. He thrashed, spun, slammed backward into the arena wall with me between him and the composite. The impact drove the air from my lungs, and something in my left hand broke. A clean snap that I felt more than heard. I held on. My broken hand screamed. My ribs ground against each other. The gash across my back reopened and blood ran down my skin. Korath threw himself forward, trying to flip me over his head, and I adjusted my grip, shifted my weight, maintained the choke. He was fading. I could feel it in the weakening of his movements, the slowing of his clawed hands, the increasingly desperate quality of his thrashing, his breeding, his training, his 37 perfect victories. None of it could overcome the simple biological reality that his brain was being starved of blood by a creature who refused to let go. He went to his knees. The arena floor vibrated with the impact. 10,000 beings watched in absolute silence as the most dangerous Drauk alive sank toward unconsciousness, with a human locked onto him like something out of a nightmare. Korath's seconds, 2 senior Drauk officers standing at the edge of the arena, saw what was happening. They saw their champion's movements becoming uncoordinated, saw his claws opening and closing without purpose, saw the unmistakable signs of a fighter on the edge of permanent damage. Under Crucible rules, a champion's seconds could end the fight by throwing in the signal. They looked at each other, they looked at Korath, and they threw the signal. A red cloth landed on the arena floor. The arbiter stepped forward. The match is ended. The champion's seconds have conceded. I held the choke for 2 more heartbeats, long enough to be certain, then released. Korath collapsed face forward onto the composite, unconscious. His massive body lay still, his scales rising and falling with shallow, automatic breathing. I stood, again, broken, bleeding, with a fractured hand and cracked ribs and claw marks carved across half my body. I stood. The silence lasted for 5 full seconds. Then the arena erupted. Not just the humans this time. The Gorvathi roared, slamming their fists against the galleries with a force that shook the entire structure. The Velesi clicked in a synchronized cascade that sounded like rainfall on metal. The Filari blazed with colors I had never seen, golds and silvers and deep, pulsing blues that turned the upper galleries into a living aurora. Species that had never spoken to each other were on their feet, united in a single, overwhelming recognition. The challenge of lineage had failed. Humanity's place in the coalition was not just preserved, it was cemented. In the Drauk section, the officers who had orchestrated this sat in rigid silence, their yellow eyes fixed on the unconscious body of their champion. Their political weapon had been broken, and with it, their ability to challenge humanity through the old laws. The moderates among them, the ones like Lieutenant Drevak who had tried to warn me, were already shifting in their seats, realigning, preparing for the new reality. Because the reality had changed. In 13 minutes and 42 seconds, the galaxy's understanding of humanity had been rewritten. I didn't stay for the ovation. I walked toward the east gate, my bare feet once again leaving bloody footprints on the composite floor. The Filari medics were already rushing forward, their healing instruments glowing. This time, I let them support me. Not because I couldn't walk. I could. My legs were the one part of me that wasn't damaged, but because accepting help is also a kind of strength, and I was done proving points for one day. Dante met me at the gate. He didn't say anything. He just fell into step beside me, one hand hovering near my shoulder in case I stumbled, his jaw set in that Glasgow grimace that I had learned was his version of profound emotion. Sophie was behind him, and Liam, and all the others. 11 humans forming a corridor of their own kind around me as I walked out of the arena. Not because I needed protection, because they needed to be there. The aftermath was political, diplomatic, and historic, but I didn't experience most of it firsthand. I spent 48 hours in the medical bay, while the Falari healed my broken hand, resealed my ribs for the second time, and marveled at the speed of my recovery. Admiral Sayith visited to inform me that the Coalition Council had voted unanimously to upgrade humanity's membership from provisional to full, the fastest elevation in Coalition history. The Draelk War Council's faction had been formally censured by 9 species, and their leadership was undergoing an internal restructuring that diplomats were calling the most significant shift in Draelk politics in a century. Thessic came one last time. She brought no data chip, no intelligence dossier. She simply stood beside my pod and clicked her mandibles in a pattern that I had never heard before. When I asked Liam to translate it later, he told me it was a Valesi phrase, reserved for beings they consider worthy of historical record. Korath survived. He regained consciousness within an hour and, according to Drevak, refused to speak about the fight to anyone. 3 days later, he requested a transfer to a frontier posting, far from the political maneuvering of the homeworld. Before he left, he did something that shocked his entire species. He sent me a message. 3 words in formal Draelk, which Liam translated as, "Well-fought warrior." From a warblade, that was the highest compliment the Draelk language could express. I received the Coalition's highest individual honor, the Stellaris Commendation, in a ceremony I barely remember through the haze of painkillers. Admiral Saitwith presented it, her skin a brilliant, steady gold that I was told she had never displayed publicly before. The citation read, "For extraordinary valor in defense of interspecies unity," which was a polite way of saying, for beating 2 Draelk in single combat and forcing the galaxy to take humans seriously. But none of that is what I remember most. What I remember is the quiet moment after, standing at the observation deck on the station's upper ring, looking out at the stars. Earth wasn't visible from this angle, just the endless scattering of light across the void, the galaxy in all its terrifying, beautiful enormity. Every point of light a sun, every sun a possible world, every world a possible story. I stood there in my medical gown, my hand in a regeneration cast, my ribs wrapped, my back striped with healing scars, and I thought about what Thessic had told me after the first fight. That fear and respect are different currencies. She was right, but she had missed something. There is a third currency, one that humans have been spending since we first looked up at the sky and wondered what was out there. Stubbornness. Not courage. Courage is too noble a word for what we do. We don't face the impossible because we're brave. We face it because something in the wiring of our brains simply refuses to accept that impossible is a real thing. We look at a mountain and think, I bet I could climb that. We look at an ocean and think, I wonder what's on the other side. We look at the void between stars and think, yeah, we're going there too. And when something bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than us says, you don't belong here, we look it in the eye and say, watch us. I touched the scars on my cheek. 3 claw marks, healed now into thin white lines against my skin. I would keep them, not as a reminder of pain, not as a trophy, but as a record. A record of the moment when someone thought a human would stay down. Dante found me at the observation deck. He stood beside me and looked out at the same stars. The new training cycle starts tomorrow, he said. I know. You planning to take a few more days off? Medical would sign off on it. I looked at him. He looked at me. We both knew the answer. I'll be there at 0600, I said. He nodded. No argument. No surprise. Just a slight upturn at the corner of his mouth that was the closest Dante Voss ever came to a smile. We stood there for another minute, 2 humans on a station, surrounded by species that had been crossing galaxies while we were still learning to make fire. 2 representatives of a planet that had clawed its way from mud huts to the stars in the blink of a cosmic eye. 2 members of a species that the galaxy had underestimated, dismissed, mocked, and challenged. 2 members of a species that was still standing. I turned away from the window, walked back to my barracks, and started preparing for the next day, because that's what humans do. We don't rest on victories. We don't build monuments to past glories. We get up the next morning, we put on our boots, and we get back to work. The galaxy had learned something in that arena that it wouldn't forget. Not the choke, Not the submission, not the blood on the floor, or the broken bones, or the 3 seconds that changed everything. What it learned was simpler than that, and infinitely more frightening. You can knock a human down, you can break our bones, tear our skin, and push us past every limit that biology says we should have. You can bring your champions, your warblades, your ancient codes, and your political machinations. You can throw everything you have at us and watch us fall. But the moment you think we're finished, the moment you turn your back and start writing the victory speech, that is when you have already lost. Because we will get back up. We always get back up.